We interrupt our programming to take you to the Institut de France, where the French President Emmanuel Macron is reflecting on the legacy of Napoleon. Let's listen in.
200th anniversary. The fight against ignorance. Our love for knowledge and history. And our desire to not give any ground to those who would remove history simply because it does not match their vision of the present. No, Napoleon Bonaparte is part of all of us. He's part of all of us because just saying the name excites people. The cannonades of the Italian campaign, the Battle of Austerlitz, the great army engaged in the campaign in Russia. Napoleon Bonaparte is part of all of us. And that is because action and the lessons learned from him as a legislator, as a fighter, as a strategist, still today echo. He's part of us because, as the myth of the man emerged, he became that part of France that conquered the world. Chateaubriand, you mentioned him earlier. In fact, both of our previous speakers mentioned him, had a difficult relationship with the emperor. And in many ways, in the way he expressed it, in a way that's still relevant today, he passed the world by alive, but he owns it once dead. We have here high schoolers and the institution of high school in France, the lycée. The higher education institutions, such as the Grande École that you may be joining in a few months, we owe part of them to Napoleon. And here today at the Institut de France, to be with us, you travelled across Paris. You maybe saw the Arc de Triomphe, La Madeleine, Vendôme. You maybe even crossed the Iéna or Austerlitz bridges, the Rivoli area. All of these great areas and architectural marvels we owe to Napoleon as well. They're still here, they're still alive. And very few destinies, it deserves to be said, have shaped history in quite this way. And that is why we are together here this afternoon. We're not here to celebrate in only positive terms his life as the people of Paris did when his ashes were returned to Paris, but to look back in an enlightened way, with our eyes open, to look back at our history as a whole, to say as a nation what Napoleon says about us and what we made of him. In 1802, Napoleon, and you mentioned this as well, Napoleon re-established slavery that the Convention of 1794 had abolished. The Second Republic repaired that betrayal, that mistake of the period. In the Pantheon, Abbot Grégoire took up the universal flag. Napoleon, through his conquests, never truly worried about human losses. Chateaubriand, in fact, accused him of sacrificing 5 million French people, although a little exaggerated. Goya painted the massacre of civilians in 1808. Since then, we have placed the value of human life higher than anything else in time of war and of pandemic. Napoleon wrote in stone civil equality between men in the French Civil Code, the guarantee of law for all with the Code Pénal, the criminal code. We followed in the footsteps of that progress by fighting for equality between men and women and by removing from that same criminal code the most cruel of punishments, capital punishment. We also broadened what was possible through the baccalaureate and grew our education system and made it accessible to as many people as possible. At the end of the day, we gave up the worst of the empire and we took the best of the emperor. Let us commemorate this 200th anniversary. And in commemorating it, we say these things open-mindedly and clear-headedly, without anachronism and judging the past by the rules of the present, but by looking back at who we are, the French people. We are a historical society, a country for the ages that moves forward without denying, but by reinterpreting and recognizing and looking for understanding. A nation that bears legacies as a free people. From Clovis to the committee, I bear responsibility for everything, he said. And today, we bear responsibility for everything still. But the life and works of Napoleon are more than just what we turned them into as a nation. Through its scope, through its borders, and through its lasting legacy, we see that by upsetting the universal, his life has something of an intimate echo in all of our lives, ancient virtues and modern paradoxes. The life of Napoleon is first and foremost an ode to political willpower. People may think that destinies are written in stone before their time, but a young child from Ajaccio who became the man of the world shows that a single man, can change the course of history. His military victories, his energy, his tactical choices in Wagram, Austerlitz, his presence in the past and in the present have been changed. Imagine succeeding in Russia or Vienna. The destiny of France would not have been the same without these events. We love Napoleon because his life shows what is possible, because his life invites us to take risks, invites us to trust our imagination and to fully be ourselves. The life of Napoleon goes beyond this. It's also related to reasoning, and he is probably one of the people who went the furthest in the Enlightenment. The art of organization, of thinking, all of that legacy from the 18th century. In the St. Helena Memorial, he is described as being exceptional in mathematics, arithmetics. He spent days and nights reading books on military strategy. Gaspard Gourgaud was another person exiled with him, and he said of the emperor that he was similar to Spinoza. But beyond his personal growth, Napoleon wanted that reasoning, science, that technical understanding put France on the path to progress. That is why he reformed the Polytechnique school, which today still gives France its top engineers. Saint-Cyr, the officer training academy in France, still trains genius military officers. Napoleon also, every time, sought to contribute to pushing forward scientific knowledge and research. The Egypt campaign is one example of this. More so than a military campaign, this was a scientific expedition. From the Institut, that he followed closely, he won over more than 150 scientists, doctors, botanists, architects, mathematicians, some of the greatest minds of his time, and brought them together in an academy of sciences to study the world flora, fauna, and everything about Egypt. They did it together and brought back a body of knowledge that is commended by all. His life is the epiphany of freedom, despite all of its paradoxes, and despite all of what you mentioned of his relationship to the freedom of others. But Napoleon may be the first romantic, and that's not just because he inspired Goethe, because he inspired Stendhal. Victor Hugo lacked words to celebrate him. He was described in many ways, in a way that sometimes rectifies history, as you explained, but not for these reasons, but because in every aspect of his life, he would reinvent his own existence. He was infinitely free, a force of nature. He would always follow his heart, even to divorce after being crowned by the Pope and leading the Concordat. He had great mastery of strategy, but also of surprise warfare and movement by breaking away from traditional tactics, and that is what led to his success. He had that 100-day panache, and he had weaknesses. He had the melancholia of Saint Helena. He had all of these contradictions within him. He was an enlightened despot. Napoleon, as it was written, was capable of all of the greatest, of being modest, of succeeding in his dreams, and also falling from high pedestals. He was both an ogre and an eagle. He represented his time, but also police repression. He could indeed be the soul of the world, as Hegel wrote in Iéna, and also the demon of Europe in the same man. That is the dark side of unlimited freedom. Napoleon represents in the building of this nation something universal, a universal legacy. From where I stand, Napoleon is the man who gave existence to our organization, our administration. He gave shape to the early sovereignty as it emerged from the French Revolution. And here, once again, we are not here to judge the way he accessed power with the Orangerie and the 18th of Brumaire. We're not here to say whether Napoleon was a proponent or an opponent of the revolution values. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert, especially in this house, but also this is a debate that divided historians from the moment he passed and continues to today. The fact is that after months of failures, of difficult fronts, Napoleon was able to be order incarnate. After months of uncertainty and hesitance, Napoleon was able to give sustainable meaning to that revolutionary intuition of sovereignty. How did he do this? Well, Napoleon very quickly understood that it was necessary to fill the void left by the divine right, replacing it by another form of legitimacy, another form of transcendency. And to him, that was the French people. Everything done without the people is illegitimate. And behind the French people, as the new bearers of national sovereignty, as the bearers of this transcendency, of course, they didn't have the democratic freedom, but we did see the shape of the state. State through mayors and prefects, who would soon be deployed throughout the country and enable the country to stay united, and the great institutions of France that were set up at that time. Napoleon also understood that he needed to tirelessly seek unity and grandeur for the country. He did this through war, by finding shared enemies for France, such as England, and also the French people were thirsty for universality, and he sought that at European scale. He did this by calming relations with the big religions through the Concordat. He did it through warfare, and he also did it by reconciling those who had been torn apart in the bloody revolution. Through the principles of equality, Napoleon was the architect of the armistice of some part of the royalists, that same unity was visible in his government. At the end of the day, he brought together the country in the concrete way around the symbols used when he was crowned. The hand of justice, the Merovingian relics, the necklace of the Légion d'honneur. Because his ultimate intuition was to fill the void left by the king on the 21st of January. In 1802, he would become a lifetime consul, and his vision was radical: to reconcile republic and empire by becoming the emperor of the French people. A personal ambition that he hoped would prevent any fall back to the previous state and hoped would make the revolution sustainable. In 1789, the French people, as Tocqueville wrote, made the greatest effort that any people has ever made. They split their destiny in two. They put a gulf between them, between what they were and what they wanted to be. The genius of Napoleon was to help the French people to break away permanently, definitively, from what they decided to leave behind them in 1789 and to cross that gulf. He could not, however, anchor the revolution and also prevent the French people from seeking the freedom that they so desired. 1789, in that, is stronger than Napoleon. You are high schoolers. You are French people. And you are part of this history. You are not responsible, nor are you wardens of this history. You can love it and you can criticize it, so long as you learn it, so long as you know it. But history is here. It's part of what builds us. It's important to take on this new century. It's part of you, and you must continue this history. Napoleon's works, overall, in all of their contrasts with their light and their dark sides, have yet to be fully understood. But it continues to shape us. And the sun of Austerlitz still shines bright. Long live the Republic, and long live France.
Welcome back to our viewers. We've just been